I am going to do something that I sort of said I would do almost 7 months ago, but haven't quite found the time for until now. I want to talk about this Crash 1 remake idea that I had, that I made a few prototype levels for last year, and I guess take another look at those levels and explain a bit more about them and the thinking behind them, and just talk about the whole concept in general, because I still haven't really done that yet, not properly. I say I haven't had time to do this until now, which is true, but I suppose it's also that I wanted to give people chance to see that concept video, and I wanted to let a decent pile of comments and feedback build up, so I could get a better sense of whether or not anyone thought it might actually be a good idea to pursue the project, which I am still referring to as hard mode for the time being. I'd love to know if anyone's got any better suggestions. But you know what? The response was so much better than I ever expected it to be. I've had a lot of encouragement and a lot of people saying they wanted to see me do the rest of the game. I also had a lot of people telling me that some of these levels look ridiculously hard considering they're at the start of the game, which I completely agree with. I'll come on to that later. The question of whether or not I am going to do this remake for real and do the whole game is something I talked about briefly when I was playing Crash on the Run a couple of weeks ago. I basically said then that if I have the time to do it, I will do it. It's kind of impossible for me to say how much free time I'll have a few months from now at the moment, because I have no idea what I'll be doing yet, or where I'll be living, or anything like that. So this kind of project would take a lot of time, and there are other things I want to do with my free time and with my life than just fuck around with these games. So it depends how easy I find it to juggle everything else that I'll be doing as well as doing this. I can't really give a more definitive answer than that at the moment. The one thing I can say for definite is that I am not going to start this project for real until the level editor that I made these levels with has been released. That is still happening, as fast as I can physically make it happen. So don't worry about that. I'm not going to get distracted with this other stuff until I've given everyone a way to make levels like these for themselves. I mean, these levels were, aside from being like a concept for the remake, or the reimagining, I should say, that's the way I described it before, although that is a bit wanky and I don't really like it, but I was also making these levels to test the editor while working on it. And just recently, as I've been getting back into that stuff and re-familiarising myself with it all and reminding myself of what I need to do to get the editor finished, I have been putting some more basic concepts together. Not like full levels, mostly just sort of scenic mock-ups, just to get a feel for what some of the ideas that I've had might look like in-game. The first set of levels I made were mostly based on the first island in the game. So with this more recent stuff, I've been thinking about what I might like to do with some of the later levels. And there's a couple of gameplay ideas that I've tested as well to see how viable they might be. But even if I wanted to get started doing a full remake now, I would still wait until the level editor had been released, because one of the issues I had while making full levels while still developing it was everything became very incompatible very quickly. It wasn't easy to reopen levels that I'd started making on an earlier version of the editor, because I changed so much of the code that everything always ended up being very broken. So I'm not going to attempt to start any big projects until I have something stable to make them with, which I hopefully will soon. Anyway, the TLDR is I'll do it if I can. There are other issues apart from just the time factor, but that's going to be my main hurdle with something like this. I mean, I can't deal with the other problems unless I have the free time to deal with them. So time is the biggest thing at this stage. But hang on a minute, what the fuck am I talking about anyway? What is this remake idea? I did give a quick explanation in the introduction to the concept video, but to put it simply, the question I asked myself was, what might the Insane trilogy have looked like if it was like a full-blown remake rather than a remaster plus, which is how someone described it once. And I guess when using the term reimagined, I'm thinking of stuff like Ratchet and Clank, the remake of that. I mean, I'm not super familiar with that series. I don't know exactly how different that remake was to the original game, and I don't know how well received it was by the fans. I just know it doesn't stick as close to the original formula as the Insane Trilogy does to the original Crash games. It was like a new take on the same story and the settings of the original game. The thing that actually gave me this idea in the first place, which I gave a shout out to in the concept video, was Rayman Redemption, which is not exactly the same thing as what I've been doing with this. It's its own standalone game. It's not like a mod like this would be, but it is a fan-made remake of the original Rayman game, where the levels are similar but different, and there's a few new things and a few twists. And I don't want to spoil anything if you're a Rayman fan and you haven't played it yet, but towards the end of the game when I was playing it, I was thinking, like, I know exactly what I would do for some of the final levels if I'd made this. I know exactly what element I would bring in from the Rayman series that wasn't in the original Rayman one. And I thought, surely no one but me would be crazy enough to do something like that in this kind of remake. But then the exact thing that I'd been thinking about actually happened. It appeared in a level, and after I stopped laughing about it, I thought, well, if I'm thinking along the same lines as someone who's done this kind of reimagining of a PS1 platforming game from my childhood, maybe I could apply that same thinking to a different game and see what I can come up with. So that's how the idea of a Crash 1 reimagining was born. I've always said that the original Crash Bandicoot on PS1 is my favourite game of all time. And here I am, working on a level editor for the remastered version of it. So I thought if I'm ever going to attempt something like that myself, that's the game I'm doing it with. But I think if I want to start talking specifics, I should take a look at those concept levels again and discuss them a little bit. So let's do that. This is the opening cutscene of the game, which I did include in that other video because I had modified it. It was mostly obscured by the text that I added to explain what you were watching, so you won't have seen this little detail that I added here. This is kind of just here to make the point that I did modify the cutscene itself. The shot that I changed did happen in-game, and that wasn't video editing. People are always surprised that these cutscenes aren't pre-rendered. For me, the first computer I ever played this game on was a MacBook without dedicated graphics, so I was never in any doubt about that. But the reason why I replaced the classic shot of Crash jumping out the window with him running down a hallway being chased by a lab assistant, it should be pretty clear if you've seen the first of these levels.
Prepare the female Bandicoot.
So, unlike the original game, I've got you starting in the castle, trying to escape, because I don't want to just remake all the levels that already exist. I want to add in some new ones and have some surprises in there. So I thought, make the first thing you see a new level to really get across the point that this is not going to take you on exactly the same journey that you've been on before. Or it kind of is, but with some expansion and some extra bits. And I think in general, people were on board with this idea, like having a level before Sanity Beach where you have to play through the escape that normally happens in a cutscene. The main criticism people had about this was that it would be way too hard for a first level. And yeah, no, it totally is. It's a bit of a nightmare for a first level. I guess my thinking was, for one, anyone who plays this would already be familiar with the original game, so like this would never be someone's first experience of Crash Bandicoot, and having a gentle learning curve wouldn't be that important. Like the people who play something like this would be mostly hardcore Crash fans, I imagine. So I wasn't really thinking of it like if this was a real official remake, how would it be designed? But also, I knew that I was making this level to be watched rather than to be played, because it is just like a prototype, it's a demonstration. This was never going to be the final version of this level, so I thought making it more challenging would be more interesting viewing, if you see what I mean. I knew I wasn't planning on doing anything from later in the game, because the ideas that I've had for the later levels are things that I definitely do want to keep as surprises. So I probably did make this more difficult than I would have done if it was level 1 in a remake of a full game. And something else that a lot of people were wondering about was the music in this level. It's actually the Embryo theme from Crash 2. You don't normally get to hear it very well because it only appears when he's talking to you in the warp room, but I thought it was appropriate for this level. So I guess the Crash 2 music and the presence of nitro crates in this level is an indication that I'm not approaching this as a Crash 1 purist. In terms of the environments as well, there are plenty of other games in the series that revisit these islands from the first game in some way and let you explore some new locations there. So that is something that I've thought about a lot when coming up with ideas for this. I think you can see that more clearly in the next couple of levels. There is a chicken here in this cage. It's quite hard to miss this one, but I don't know if anyone's realised this, but there is a chicken somewhere in every one of these levels. So some are more obvious than others, like this guy. I'm not aware of anyone having spotted them all, but I promise there is one in every level, and they are all visible in this footage. That was kind of my tribute to Beanox, because I'm a big fan of CTR Nitro Fueled, as you may know. Anyway, once you escape the lab assistants and they start dropping down this pit like a bunch of lemmings, you get a bit of a breather where you see a bit more of the castle. I dumped the Evolve array into the background here because I could, and I think it looks cool. And then, just when you think you're safe, fucking Embryo. I mean, they really don't want you to escape, and they know the lab assistants are pretty pathetic, so they're not going to let you get away that easily, I reckon. Coming up here is, I think, probably the most unfair part of any of these levels. Not necessarily the most difficult, but just the most bullshit thing in any of these. I don't think even Crash 4 did anything quite as bullshit as this. This whole wall of nitros is something you cannot possibly avoid the first time you play this. I mean, there's a speed boost right there that throws you directly into them without warning, so you need to know when to slide to avoid those. But again, I was making this as something to be watched rather than played, and I just thought it was really cool to see him smashing through the nitros like that, so I am glad I left it in, even though I probably wouldn't do this in the final version. That's Embryo's lab back there in that hole. I don't think it really makes sense from an architectural point of view, but I guess a big part of what I want to do with this idea is show how all these different locations and different levels across the game are connected. I do have some better ideas about how to do that with this level in particular, I think, but I won't spoil them. But actually, since I mentioned Crash 4, the reason why I posted that concept video when I did was to make sure it was up before Crash 4 came out. I uploaded it that week because I'd heard about the flashback tapes. I knew about the time travel theme, of course. So I thought there was a chance that this idea I'd had for a level set just before the start of Crash 1 in Cortex Castle could be very similar to something they might have done with Crash 4. Even though I knew I'd made this level months earlier, before the flashback tapes or anything like that had been revealed, I still didn't want people to think I'd copied something from Crash 4 in case it turned out to be too similar. So that's why I uploaded it when I did. Now that I've played Crash 4, there are definitely some elements from the Cortex Island levels that I probably would take inspiration from. But in this case, I didn't. I hadn't seen any of that stuff when I made this. But yeah, that's basically the reason why I skipped a level later on in this demo. I wanted this to be up before Crash 4 came out. At the end of the chase here, you have to wait for a second for him to hit the switch to spawn this crate bridge. I think I wanted to create a bit of tension by forcing you to let him catch up with you before you can keep going, but I think there's more interesting ways to do stuff like that. Anyway, you can get the gem in this level because I actually bothered to set up the crates properly. I didn't do that with all of them. And then here, you finally get to jump out the window, like you normally see Crash doing for himself during the cutscene.
Crash! Crash Bandicoot!
I think apart from that intro, I would mostly leave the cutscenes alone. There might be some things I'd want to do in terms of messing with the lore and continuity and stuff, but I would probably want to do that through the levels themselves. Although I do have an idea of how I would change the 100% ending cutscene. Not in a major way, but, well, no spoilers, but I do really like what I've come up with for that. But talking of continuity, there's something I want to draw attention to here at the start of Sanity Beach. This right here in the background is Cortex Castle, where we just were. In the original PS1 version of the original Crash Bandicoot, you can see Cortex Castle in the distance from the very start of the game, and it's one of my favourite details in the game, because something that I've always loved in game design, in level design, is when you can see some other part of the game that you've either been to before or that you will be going to later. In this case, it's actually both. But I think these levels make it apparent that I'm a fan of that kind of thing. So, like the fact that you can see the very end of the game from the moment you start playing in the original version, it doesn't get any better than that for me. But in the Insane Trilogy, they got rid of that detail. And yeah, sure, they made the jungle much denser and it looks pretty nice, but it's always annoyed me that they took that view of the castle away from the first level, and I knew that was one thing I would need to bring back if I remade these levels for myself. And I feel like, especially given that in my version you've just escaped from that castle yourself, it kind of helps you to understand how where you are now relates to where you just were. And like by zooming out from it like this and showing it there in the distance, I wanted to give a sense of context and scale to show you what your ultimate goal is and to get you thinking about the kind of adventure you're going to have trying to get back there. I know I'm spending a long time on this, but I think this shot right here kind of sums up one of the reasons why I love Crash 1 so much. It is like an adventure. It's a journey across these islands. It's not random and disjointed like some of the other games where you're warping all over the place and 1 minute you're in a medieval village and then suddenly you're in Egypt and then you're underwater and it's horrible. So like the connections between the levels is something I want to make more obvious. I want to link everything together and really emphasize that idea that it's one single journey, an adventure. The original game did do a pretty good job of that, but there's still stuff like, well, how are you getting from one island to the next? How are you getting from an ancient temple to a rope bridge and then suddenly back into the jungle? That's all the kind of stuff I really want to explore with this, and I already have a lot of ideas for that I really like. I mean, I was already thinking about that kind of thing before I even had the idea for this remake thing, because I have in the past thought about trying to do something like combining every level from Crash 1 together into one enormous level, because of the way it is like one long journey through a continuous environment. And then in the places where one level doesn't lead very naturally into the next one, I would have added in like a new area to join them together. But apart from that, I would have kept the original levels as close to unchanged as possible. But now that I have a bit more experience with this game and a better understanding of how these levels actually work, I know that's never going to be possible. But what I've tried to do with the reimagining idea is invoke that same kind of sense that everything is joined together the way it appears to be on the map. But anyway, on the subject of getting a glimpse of things you'll be exploring more closely much later on, this one solitary crate here is completely inaccessible in this level. But I kind of thought it would be funny if there was one crate in Insanity Beach that you couldn't get to until you had every other gem in the game. So that one crate and the gem platform later on is what I was hinting at with that, but it's not actually implemented properly in any way in this. But here it is, Sanity Beach. Took us long enough to get here, didn't it? Looks quite familiar to begin with. You kind of miss Crash washing up on the beach because of that zoom out from the castle. I think it's easy enough to delay that animation, but I didn't bother here. So this obviously is all just copied from normal Sanity Beach, apart from a bit of deforestation that I did to make the castle visible. I wanted to make sure I showed a few different types of levels in this demo. So the castle level was like, here's an entirely new level that was never in the original. This one is a new version of a level that was in the original. So I left the start of it pretty much the same. And then later on, there's a sort of combination of two of the original levels, and then a remake of a prototype level that was cut before the final game. But we'll get to those in a bit. There's another wall of nitros here just to remind you that however normal things look at the start, it's all going to get weird again soon enough. So instead of continuing into the jungle straight away, you take this path over to a beach, because it always annoyed me that it was called Sanity Beach, but you're only on the beach for a couple of seconds. And you can see more of what I was talking about before right here. There's a part of the level that you're not going to get to for a while. And of course, this is very Twinsanity inspired. You have a cannon pointing at some pillars that it looks like you might be able to jump on. So, like I said, this is not a purist remake by any means. And wherever I can, wherever it's appropriate, I want to bring in stuff from the other games. Not breaking these crates because there was an outline crate up there that I guess will become important soon. I don't know, I haven't played this for a long time. I think this level has a problem where a lot of it is quite open and sparse. I would definitely want to add some more interesting stuff in here if I do make it again. I quite like this though, this sort of branching path where you can go off to the side and explore, and you can get a closer look at this background area and wonder about how you're going to get over there later. I don't know how obvious this is, but this island in the distance is supposed to be the second island, which is Wumper Island, I guess. I don't know if that makes any geographical sense, but that's why there's a big old tree on top of it. That's one thing that doesn't really feature properly in Crash 1 that I would be interested in taking a closer look at in my own version. But yeah, clearly the idea here is that somehow you'll get over to that cannon later and fire a cannonball at these TNTs, which will lower this pillar for you to jump on. It is a little bit smoke and mirrors. I didn't really do the collision properly, so you don't actually need to do any of that shit. If I can find a version of this level I can still get into, I'll show you what I mean. But anyway, I think Twinsanity would be a big inspiration for a lot of the first island, at least. For most of the start of that game, you're visiting locations from Crash 1, so I would want to bring more of that stuff into this. You might have seen the worm chase level I made once. That was completely separate to this, but I mean, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't tempted to find somewhere that I could include that. I don't think I really managed it with these levels, but I also want to look at thumping Wumper Islands when working through this first island. I think they did a really nice job there of transitioning from the beach into the jungle and then into the native village. I think it's a pretty good example of how you could remake the start of this game. In terms of the environment, at least, the gameplay is obviously a little bit different. But yeah, this whole area is a bit empty. Also, this water is kind of horrible and weirdly animated. I would do something different for that in the real version. Here's a death route anyway. No death routes in Crash 1 normally, so it's something I really wanted to add to some of these levels. And I'm taking the Wrath of Cortex approach, where the camera always follows you over there and you can see where the area is in relation to the rest of the level. This is something different though, having to break crates while still on the death route platform. I thought that was a fun little twist. But speaking of the Wrath of Cortex, I think some people recognised the way these crates are laid out. This is copied from Crash and Burn in the Wrath of Cortex. I thought that was a fun reference because floating above the water on this platform like this reminded me of the start of that level, where I think you float over to it on the back of a turtle or something. So I might do more stuff like that. I guess it's the same sort of thing they did in Crash 4, where the crates at the start of Crash Landed are copied from, I think it's Snow Go. Anyway, I think I missed this crate in the tree a few times while trying to record this. It's not quite Crash 4 levels of hidden crates, but I managed to not notice it a few times, even though I put it there, so that's good. A lonely little turtle up here, and a lonely little chicken down there in the boat. And then here we are, up at the cannon. This switch activates the outline crates we went past before. I can't remember if there's levels in other games where that happens, but since I've got you doing stuff in the death route that affects the main path of the level with the cannon, I thought I might as well do some more of that. I'm not going to get all technical and explain how this cannon works, but if you look very closely at those TNTs, you can just about make out that there's a faint light that starts flashing behind them when you fire the cannon that may or may not be related. You can't really see it, but I did forget to remove the effect for that light, so it is still there. On the trip back to the main level, people seemed to enjoy this part when I was dancing to the music. I did that just because I was trying to distract you from the fact that the draw distance is a bit broken, and this big wall in the distance is visible even when the jungle around it isn't. And also, this might be the only level where I actually put the music in properly instead of just adding it to the video later on, so I couldn't have actually crouched like this in time to the music in the other levels. Also, I think these mountains here are incredibly ugly. The reason they're here is because the normal terrain in this level is one big single model, and because I wanted to use the normal terrain at the start and then do my own thing, I put these mountains in to obscure the rest of that model. Parts of the terrain I didn't want to actually use until later on. So it's a bit ugly, but you know, I would find a better way of doing it. There definitely would have been a more creative way to do that if I'd taken my time and put some thought into it. But then I could say the same about everything in all of these levels. By the way, CTR music for the death routes, what do we think of that? Since I made this, I've been tempted by some of the music from Crash on the Run too. I think there's some stuff in that soundtrack that would fit very well for some of my ideas, but we'll see. Doing some backtracking here. Because of all this stuff with the death route, this level turned out to be quite a bit longer than any of the others, which wouldn't be the case in the full remake. I would try to flesh the others out a bit more. I kind of rushed them a bit for the demo. And now you can finally get across these pillars, which you obviously couldn't possibly have done before. Eventually, you get back to this other beach where Death Route started, and here are those iconic steps. I was never going to leave them out. They even made it into Crash 4, you know. There's a bit of lag here, and in another situation, I may have restarted the level and recorded it again, but these levels are all so horribly broken, and trying to reach this point without dying was such a pain in the ass, I didn't bother restarting when stuff like this happened. All of these levels took me hours to record because the collision and the cameras and the checkpoints and everything, none of it works properly. They're all very incomplete and very difficult to get through without something going wrong. And like anytime you see the camera clip through something like it does here, that's also something that only happened once on that particular playthrough, but I couldn't face starting the whole level again, so deal with it. I have to. This switch over here is kind of hidden, but I tried to hint that it was there by putting another more obvious crate just outside the steps, and also the outline crate shows you that there has to be a switch somewhere. So again, I don't think it's as bad as the hidden crates in Crash 4. This is probably the most hidden crate out of any in these levels, so I don't think it's too bad. This area up here is me sort of pushing an idea from the original level a bit further, because the crate bridge in the normal version of this level is easier to break when you're invincible, but it's still possible if you're not. I added some reinforced crates here, which means you need 3 masks to break them. If you body slam them, you'll just fall to your death. I'm not sure about this section. It's a bit weird. I'd probably do something a bit different if I made this again. But here's that gem platform I mentioned. The idea being that it would take you off to some horribly difficult side area that would end with you breaking that one crate that you saw at the start. I guess I wanted to take the idea of a really tough gem path that you need all the gems, or all the coloured gems for, like in Spaced Out, or well, now like in Toxic Tunnels. But having that area at the start of the game instead of the end, I thought would be a bit of a subversion. Anyway, this part is similar to the start of the level. It's just copied straight from the original, really. with a few differences in the crates and stuff. This is actually partly inspired by the first Insane Trilogy level mod that I ever did, which was, like almost 3 years ago now, which I called Sanity Beach Hard Mode. That's the first time I used that name. That one had the switch crate right next to some nitros like this, and the crates above the pit that it activated were trickier than in the original layout too. It's not quite as bad as that in this one, which is probably a good thing. And then of course, despite all that effort and all the time I spent going through that level, I'm still missing one crate, so it does feel a little bit like Crash 4. I changed this ending area a little bit from the original. I added another set of steps here, and the idea was that jungle rollers would start at the top of those steps, again to give a bit more continuity between levels, but I never made jungle rollers, so use your imagination. You jump into this exit at a bit of a jaunty angle. That happens with most of these levels. Don't worry about it. It's a prototype. I do know how to fix that. But we've skipped jungle rollers, and we're on to the Great Gate, which I think is my favourite out of all these levels. The first half of this level was actually the first thing that I made for this demo. I thought the ideas that I'd had for it, where you're going behind the Great Gate, were a good example of the kind of thing I wanted to do with this remake. So I made the first part of this level. It was the first thing I did for this project, and I tweeted it out to see what kind of reaction it would get and to help me decide if it was worth making some full levels for a longer demo. And the reaction it got is the reason why I'm talking to you about it now. So people seem to like it a little bit. And I think this one really satisfies something that I always wanted to see in the original game, which is just like, what is behind this massive wall? What is it defending or hiding exactly? So I think that is part of why people like this level. I think a lot of people feel the same thing when they're playing the originals, and you kind of see a brief glimpse of some huts and stuff behind the wall. But I don't know if this was the intention in the original game, but the way I've made these levels is with the idea that everything between this level, the Great Gate, and Native Fortress, had I got that far, I was thinking like all the levels in between those 2 points would be taking place within the natives' village in some way. I guess that's something else I'm trying to emulate Twinsanity with. There's the 2 islands in the distance, by the way, in a completely different configuration to the one I was suggesting in the last level. But yeah, they kept the castle visible in these other levels and just left it out of the first one, which is so annoying. But anyway, it's worked out quite nicely in the end, because this big old totem pole here is in between those 2 islands. And that's probably my favourite example in these levels of something that you see in the background ages before you get to it. Like, you might not even realise until you're halfway up it that it is the same totem pole as this one. You'll notice these checkpoints always say null when you break them. That's because when I started making this level, I wasn't loading the language files into the editor. By the time I got to the other levels, I'd fixed that problem. But that's the kind of thing I was talking about earlier regarding incompatibility. Like, even though I'd fixed this problem later on, when I went back to this level in a newer version of the editor, it hadn't fixed it for that level. So yeah, there's a few issues like that when I tried coming back to levels I'd started making a while before. There's a mix of side scrolling and like normal front to back to front gameplay in this level. I think in the real version I would have a lot more side scrolling sections like in the original. I'd probably not have you going behind the wall until quite a bit later on. This sliding section is probably the thing that killed me the most times out of anything in these levels. I was trying to take something you only ever get to do in 2D and make it 3D, and I think it looks cool, but it needs some work. Those jumps are definitely way too hard to beat this early on in the game. Having the river running through the village like this is yet another Twinsanity thing. With the boats and the huts and everything, I was really going for some kind of totem hokum vibes with this one, and the next level as well. Going forwards in this level feels a lot like Crash on the Run. I do like the idea of adding an extra dimension to the side-scrolling levels. Just wait until I'm remaking Stormy Ascent. I think I've got some fun ideas involving that kind of thing with that level. This part where you're running towards the screen is kind of there to foreshadow the boulder that will be appearing soon. I like the idea of people starting to move in this direction and going, hang on a minute, I've played these games before, I know what's about to happen when I start moving in this direction, and I'll just be waiting for it and freaking out about it. Does that make me a sadist? Probably. You can actually see the boulder from much earlier on in the level. If you think about where it is when it appears in a little bit, in relation to everything else, and go back to the start of the level and look for it, you will spot it. I hope I'm not spoiling anything. I'm assuming that if you're watching this, you've seen all these levels before, without me skipping around and interrupting and ruining them. But anyway, everything after you cross this river, I made several months after the first part. I think probably about 3 months after the first half. It was pretty difficult to get back into this level with a much newer version of the editor, but I liked what I'd done so far, and I didn't really want to have to start the whole thing again and rebuild the whole village that I had done before. So I eventually managed to trick the editor into opening it again, which feels like something you should never have to do with a program you've coded yourself. But I am self-taught, and I'm not a good teacher. So here's another infuriating moment when the camera does something it had never done before and was never supposed to do, but I couldn't face restarting because that would mean dealing with that sliding section again. It probably took me about 500 attempts to get through that sliding bit, so this is probably the only time I ever got to this point when I was playing this level. But it's okay, because I actually love the way the camera works on this totem pole. I don't recall anything like this in another Crash game. Closest I could think of was the Acid Room in the Academy of Evil, but that's sort of the opposite of this. You're going around the inside of a tower, and this is the outside of a tower. I don't know, maybe there was something like this in one of the Titans games that I haven't played for like 14 years, so I'm not sure. But if you're interested, the way this works is there are a few copies of the camera from the Dingodile boss fight stacked on top of each other, and it just swaps between them as you climb up. It's not particularly smooth, but I'm pretty happy with it. This totem pole is, I think, the only thing, apart from the ground and anything else you walk on, that has any collision to it in any of these levels. If it didn't, it would have been impossible to make those jumps. You just clip straight through it. And then up here at the top, you get a different view of an area you've already been in. I like the idea of climbing up to the top of a level and having something like this where you can kind of get a 360 view of the whole area. I might try and do more stuff like that because I quite like that effect. That bonus platform there doesn't do shit, by the way. It's just there to show, like, this is how I would probably do bonuses, like Crash 2 style, rather than by collecting tokens. But I haven't really thought about that too much yet. It's just a placeholder, like everything else. Anyway, you're about to see what I meant about combining different levels together. The rest of this level was kind of rushed, but I think you get the idea of what I was going for. Combining levels, like I did with this, is partly about trying to free up space to add in new levels, like the castle escape level, if I can't find a nice way to just increase the number of levels in the game without breaking anything. But I also think it's just a fun thing to do. Kind of helps with the continuity thing that I keep mentioning. And hopefully it's a good opportunity for some surprises as well, even if I've kind of spoiled the surprise on this one. Like here, I have the boulder appear out of nowhere in a side-scrolling section, which is very different to how it works normally. I was trying to imply that it's like a defense mechanism released by the villagers to try and get rid of you. Did you notice the chicken? You can see what I mean about this part being rushed. I would want this to be a lot more like the original Boulders level than it is here, and like actually have it rolling down a hill at some point. It kind of defies gravity quite a lot in this version. You know what? I forgot about this. This section is kind of copied from Thumpin' Wumper, from like the boulder minigame in that. It's the same sort of temple structures with some wooden planks in between them. I tried to be clever by having some sneaky crates off to the side, but what I've actually done is given you an easy way to let the boulder just roll straight past you, so definitely needs a lot more work, this section. Yeah, this boulder doesn't really make any sense physically, and it clips through a lot of stuff, but I still like the idea of it being sent after you by the natives instead of suddenly chasing you for no reason as you go about your business, which it appears to do in the original. So yeah, I would completely redo this whole section, but I'd probably stick with the idea of having the the natives being the ones to roll it towards you in the first place. When you get back down to the river and you reach this log, I intended for this to be the same log that you start on in Upstream, but with the camera facing the other way. I think I could have made that a lot more obvious. I mean, for a start, the lighting is completely different, so I could have done a better job with that. But here it is, Upstream. The first thing you see is this mysterious bomb crate. I like the idea of bringing in new types of crates, or at least new to Crash 1. They are based on the detonator crates to Insanity, except I'm using them to blow up big TNTs, which are always fun. Ever since I discovered that the big TNTs are treated as normal crates when you add them to normal levels, I've been looking for any excuse to use them, so I'm pretty happy with what I came up with for them here. The bomb crates are reskinned switch crates that spawn self-detonating normal TNTs underneath the big TNTs, but I think it works pretty well. There's quite a lot going on with this level, obviously a lot more Twinsanity influence, trying to remind you that in this version you are still within the natives territory, and also jetboards, because the jetboard is a lot of fun. I haven't used it very well though. A couple of times you need to sort of clear a path for yourself before you get on the board, but if you miss that, there's no way to get off it once you're on without killing yourself, so that's not ideal. Something I enjoyed about making this though was adding some bends to the river, because all of the rivers in Crash 1 and 2 are completely straight. I don't know how much you know about my life outside of this game, but I do know a thing or two about rivers, and rivers are not always perfectly straight channels, so I had to do something about that to make it a little bit more realistic. Expect a few decent meanders if I do make these levels properly, with like erosion and deposition more accurately accounted for on the riverbanks. I think like a gem path or something in an Oxbow Lake would be a lot of fun too. I would enjoy it anyway, even if no one else would understand what I was doing. You might think the enemies and the hazards in this level are a bit boring, and you would be right. I had some problems getting stuff into this level. I can't remember what I used as the base for this one, but it was clearly a bad choice. And I need to confess, none of these fly traps actually pose any kind of threat while you're on the board. I think only enemies that you normally encounter while you're on the jet board are actually able to hurt you while you're riding it. I think I have learned how to change that since I made this, but it does mean that this level is a lot safer than it looks. Another death route here, same as before, where it's just like another part of the level that you've already been past. Not as interesting as the first one, but it does draw attention to the fact you're still surrounded by these walls from the village, so I do like that. And it's similar to the other one because you interact with some crates you've already passed in the main part of the level. And by interact with, I mean no dancing on the platform this time because I added the music in later. I think if I'm going to stick with the camera following you when you're on these platforms, I need to design levels where you don't have to travel as far as this every time. As I mentioned when talking about my Arctic Antics remake, if you make these platforms move any faster than this, you will just fall off them. So it is something you need to think about in advance to prevent overly long journeys back to where you came from. This is a lot like what I did with Sanity Beach. Parts of the level layout are copied directly from the original, but I've added new sections in between them. My inability to get any enemies into this level is the main reason why there's so many awkward crate jumping sections like these. And because these plants don't do anything if you touch them, this part is nowhere near as dangerous as it looks. But it was still difficult to get through it because I hadn't put any collision on the riverbanks, so I still had to be very precise with my movement to avoid clipping through the sides. That's one of the reasons why it took me so long to play this level. I would have saved a lot of time if I had just put that collision in the first place, but YOLO. Here's another fake gem platform because I had some leftover crates that I couldn't be bothered to remove, so I'm implying there's a secret part of the level somewhere that you don't get to see in this, where the rest of the crates are, even though I never actually made that. But this is another place where the camera goes a bit crazy. I remember I was playing this level for like a straight 6 hours, trying to get one full successful playthrough, and this was the one and only time the camera didn't work properly on this bit. In 6 hours. So annoying. You sort of have to construct yourself a way to get up here, which I think is a fun idea in principle, but if you fuck it up, you do have to kill yourself, so maybe this kind of thing would work better somewhere else, where it's not actually necessary to get it right to progress to the level. Dock a muck is what I was thinking with this bit, with this walkway above the river. It's just that you're clearing a way for yourself instead of an NPC. I thought about adding some bees in here somewhere as an extra little reference, but then I remembered how much I hate the bee levels in Crash 2, so I decided against doing that. Also, this is the only level out of these where you interact with the chicken in some way. And by interact with, I mean there's this one final jetboard section. I think they did a lot more interesting things with the jetboard in Crash 4 than I've done here, so I may need to up my game with that a little bit. I can't really do anything crazy like they did where you're going down rapids or whatever. Like, this is called Upstream for a reason. I'm not going downhill at any point. Although I do have some ideas for later parts of the game where you could be sliding down a different kind of slope. Can you tell I really like the slot crates? I think there's some fun stuff you can do with those. Like here, I made it so you pass this crate and trigger it to start speeding up before you're actually able to break it. So you have to rush to get back to it once you get off the board. I quite like that idea. And this ending is the most obvious place where the next level directly continues from the end of this one. This is the base of the waterfall right here, so you're going to see something that looks very similar to this once I start the next level. Now this waterfall level, if you're not aware, this is a recreation of a level that was cut from the original Crash 1. I believe it was supposed to be somewhere on the second island. I've put it here on the first island instead, in my version, for a couple of reasons. One reason is that, as I said before, I wanted to show a few different types of levels, and I wanted to show that I'm thinking about including levels like this that were removed from the original game, like how they added Stormy Ascent back in as an extra level. And I knew I was just going to stick to the first island. I knew I was going as far as Upstream, so this just felt like a natural continuation from that level and a good opportunity to show that I wanted to remake some cut levels. I also really wanted to find somewhere to include this giant skull rock feature, because it's similar to the tree on the second island. They make it seem like an important landmark on this island, like it's on the map, but it never appears in any levels in this game. So I wanted to include it in here somewhere, and there is a waterfall coming out of it on the map, which is clearly intended to flow into the river in Upstream, so that's why I put this level in here. That's why the skull is here. And I thought zooming out from the skull would be a cool way to start the level. There's something I missed down here which really annoys me. These pillars are just kind of floating in the water, which doesn't make any sense. I added some ground underneath them when I remade this section at the end of Upstream, which I made after this level. But anyway, if you've never seen that original waterfall level, this was me trying to do just a straight remake of it. So all of the platforms and the water wheels and the enemies and everything are roughly in the same layout they were in the original version. I haven't actually played the original myself, and I don't know if there's a version that exists with crates in it, so I just did my own thing with the crates. And I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. It doesn't feel that good to play, but I think it looks alright. I do like these water wheels. These are reskinned versions of the rotating platforms in future tense. I think Vicarious Visions were quite open about the fact those platforms were inspired by the original Waterfall level. And these things are still called water wheels in the files for future tense. I have wondered in the past if that was because they were originally going to actually try remaking this level instead of doing something new, but I don't know. These falling rocks are terrible, and I would definitely want to change these if I was going to remake this whole thing again. They're way too small and way too close together, and they drop way too fast. And they're a big part of why this is a very, very annoying level to play. Much worse than the original, I'm sure, but my options for these platforms were a little bit limited at the time. But really, I don't think I'm planning to do exactly this, like completely remake any prototype levels if I do a full remake. It was a fun exercise to do it here. It's similar to when I did Arctic Antics. I kind of just wanted to see if I could do it with my level editor. I definitely would like to include some stuff from this and stuff from other cut levels at various points in the game, but I would probably try to do something a bit more interesting than just copy the original like I have here. I mean, there are a lot of gameplay issues with this level that would make me want to redesign it so it works better anyway. But like, this is mostly a pretty standard side-scrolling level, and I'd want to have a bit more variety going on if I was going to remake it myself. Maybe a few points where you're going into the cliff, into some caves, and then popping out somewhere else. Maybe I'd actually mix this whole thing into Upstream, so there's a few smaller waterfalls in between different river sections, stuff like that. Maybe I'd add a giant polar bear in there somewhere, because that's something that I like to do. I did put a real bonus round in this level, kind of just to demonstrate how I'm considering doing them. Like Crash 2 style, where you just jump on a platform and then the bonus area looks like a different part of the same location, instead of the normal Crash 1 way, but I haven't really decided about that yet. There's a few things that will determine what it's actually possible for me to do with the bonus rounds, but this isn't very interesting anyway. It's all just placeholder for demo purposes. I paused for a second here to try and give you a chance to spot the chicken. I don't think it's very visible through all the compression, but there is a chicken behind the waterfall there. I thought that was the only place I could put one in this level. Anyway, as I was saying, I'm probably not going to be remaking cut levels in the way I have done with this one. I would want to do my own thing and put my own spin on them like I have with the other levels. However, I know that people did like the look of this level, and they liked the fact that I remade something that was cut from the original game. And I think since I went to the trouble of remaking it in the first place, it would be a shame to not do anything with it, you know, beyond this concept thing that I made. So I'm thinking about releasing it as its own separate thing, like a sample level when I release the level editor. It does still need some work before it's properly playable. In its current form, it's pretty broken. I went back and tested it the other day, and it's not everything I've done with this level or any of the other levels were actually possible to do with the level editor at the time when I made them, so there's a few things that I cheated with. And like, I want to be able to honestly say this is a level that you can make entirely with the editor. Otherwise, what's the point of a sample level? But most of it is already done. It does need a lot more collision, so you can't just fall out of the world really easily, and there's a few model swaps that I cheated with that I would have to do properly, but I think all that stuff should be possible now, so let me know if you think it's a good idea, and I'll try to spend some time fixing it up a little bit, maybe trying to change those tiny little platforms for something better. But anyway, here's another view of the giant skull. This skull and some of these mountains here are just the model of the first island from the map screen, blown up really, really big. Fun fact, that model of the island has like a jaw that matches the skull hidden inside the mountain, which is very creepy and quite cool actually. I like the idea that if you do go exploring the caves in this cliff, you might find a giant set of teeth that somehow became dislodged from this skull at some point in time. But yeah, I like doing stuff like this, like zooming out and showing more of the environment, like reminding you where you are in the context of the whole game map, I guess. It's probably not good that I made it zoom back in while you're jumping across these crates. That can really fuck with your depth perception. But I just wanted to show that view again and say like, hey, remember what I showed you at the start of the level? Remember that cool rock that looks like a skull that was really high up above the waterfall? You made it. GG. Of course, there's something behind the waterfall. I feel like it would be a waste of everyone's time to have a waterfall in a video game and not put something behind it. And then, like I said, I'm treating most of these early levels as if they're all within the natives' territory. So up at the top here is Papu Papu's hut, which I painstakingly had to build from tiny little parts because there's no exterior model for this in the game. But yeah, this again is just me trying to keep everything connected together and show how each level leads into the next one, including the boss fights. A few people have asked whether I would change anything about the boss fights, and that's something I've thought about. The answer is, if I can find some interesting things to do with them, then yes, I will try to. I do have a few ideas about that, but again, I don't want to spoil anything. Anyway, for now, that's it. That's as far as I got with the demo levels. And that's as far as I'm going to get until the level editor's out. And even then, you know, there are quite a few as yet undetermined factors that mean I can't say for certain either way yet whether or not this is actually going to happen for real. But I will keep you updated, I promise. But even if this whole stupid project doesn't turn out to be possible or practical, a few of the ideas I've had for other parts of the game are things that I would really like to do something with, whether or not I ever do a full remake. So I think at least for my absolute favourite ideas, I will try to turn them into real levels, even if they're just standalone things and not part of a big remake thing like this. But we'll see what happens. And if you've looked at the prototype stuff I've already made and listened to me talking about my other ideas, and you hate everything about this whole thing, then I would absolutely love to see other people's interpretation of the same kind of idea. So when the level editor's done, if anyone wants to use it to attempt their own kind of reimagining of this game or of the other games or any other game, I'll be straight there to see what they've come up with, because I'd be really curious to see what other people might do with it. I mean, after all this time, as soon as I've heard that anyone has done anything with that bloody editor, I'm going to drop everything I'm doing to play it. I promise you, no one wants to see that thing released more than I do, after all the blood, sweat and tears it's put me through. Me and this game, it's personal now. So it is my intention that the next time I do something like this and talk about something in depth for hours or however long I've been going, I'm hoping that next time I do it, it will be when the level editor is released. So that'll be fun. Even if no one else cares anymore, I'm still excited about that. I'm excited to see if anyone else does do anything with it, and I'm excited to finally be able to actually try making some proper stuff with it myself, even if it's not this project, because I've been waiting a long time to actually have a proper play with it. So yeah, hopefully that'll be next time, and I'll see you then. Have a spectacular day. Peace and love.